Hello, welcome into another episode of We Witnessed. My name is Chip Brewster. I'm a national digital host with Nexstar Media, and on this program, I dive into the archives of the many stations that make up Nexstar Media Group. For this episode, we are headed to the Northwest, specifically our station in Portland, Oregon, KOIN, where one longtime reporter covered what really became the story of a lifetime. And for any child of the 90s out there, you might know the story or perhaps the name of the main character by something other than what it was actually called, Keiko. And to introduce you to Keiko and perhaps have you remember that other name, here's just a little clip from a place in Mexico.
Obviamente, este golpe se escucha mucho más fuerte por el gran oleaje que existe. Otra forma es emitiendo sonidos por el espiráculo, que es el orificio que se encuentra en la parte superior de la cabeza de Keiko, que es por donde respira.
And I've given it away in the lower third, as we call it. Yes, Keiko, also known as Free Willy, a very famous whale, certainly movie star famous. And let me add that this is the most degraded clip of archival video we have in this entire episode. So if you're a little perturbed by that, don't worry, there won't be much more of that. Let me bring in, though, our guest, the person who truly knows this story from start to finish, and that would be Lisa Balick. And Lisa is with KOIN 6, longtime reporter, also weekend anchor there. And Lisa, Keiko, born in the 70s. So when I say from the very start, you didn't know Keiko as a baby whale. But when the story moved into Oregon, that's where you picked it up.
Yeah, it was in the 90s, Chip. Thanks for having me to take a look back at, what was the most fascinating story I think I have covered over the years. Because, Keiko was worldwide known. And it is interesting, it all started, actually, his journey to what was hopefully going to be freedom, was at the end of that movie that you mentioned, there was a piece of information at the end saying, please call, to help free the whales, to stop basically, getting whales in captivity, commercial whaling. And instead, everybody, all these millions of people and children called and said, we want to free Keiko. And that's how it all started.
It is interesting, and I had to put myself in that juxtaposition because I was a child of the 90s, so I watched it as a movie and went, wow, this is a cool movie, and didn't think anymore about the fact it was about freeing a whale in captivity whose main star was a whale in captivity. And so to have that posted and have that kind of reaction, honestly, just makes sense at that point.
Absolutely. And, that really was a big push to try and do something. Craig McCaw, who was, head of telecommunications company in Seattle, he came up with, millions of dollars to help in the effort. Kids around the world send in money. And essentially that got the ball rolling. I actually went down to Mexico. I heard the possibility that the whale was possibly going to be coming from Reno Aventura, the adventure, amusement park there in Mexico City, to Newport, Oregon, where there already was an established aquarium that was right on Yaquina Bay there. They could easily pump in the fresh seawater, although they had to build a facility for several $1 million. That's why Newport ended up being the place where Keiko ended up being relocated. So I actually heard about that there was a possibility it was going to happen. Took a flyer, really, went down to Mexico City. And let me tell you, one of the most incredible impressions I have in this story was walking into Reno Aventura and to see this whale sitting on its tail with its body, I would say, more than half out of the water, as if it was in some little community swimming pool somewhere. And it was a startling impression because it was warm water. I felt the water was warm water. They dumped salt into it. The caretakers there were tremendous. They really did the best they could. The trainers, they were, gave from their heart to the whale, but clearly the facility was not what it needed to be for this whale, which was, as you saw in the clip, performing. And in fact, some of those trainers actually came with him to Oregon, worked with him. I got to know them very, very well over the few years that he was here.
Yeah.
But it was just such a sad situation to see the dramatic, from what you see, that leap to freedom, to see where this teenage movie star was actually living at the time.
I can see you reliving that trip right now. I want to take, this show is all about archival footage, so I want to take the viewers back on that trip now as well so they can kind of catch up and understand. So here is a package that Lisa did from February 1995, that trip to Mexico she was just telling us about.
Goodbye, Mexico. Hello, Oregon. Keiko, the movie star in Free Willy, is moving north, but not as far as his birthplace, which was in Iceland 16 years ago. In Mexico City, the head of Aventura, the amusement park where Keiko now lives, signed an agreement to give him away to the Earth Island Institute, an environmental group based in San Francisco. There was a lot of public pressure on the park and Warner Brothers after the movie to free Keiko, or at least improve his living conditions.
So we were looking for a facility that owned its own land, that was on the coast, that was in a cold water climate, and that had an infrastructure, that had animal care people there and good professional standards. And we looked around the country and Oregon came out on top.
At the Oregon Coast Aquarium this week, they'll start building a pool 3 times the size of this one. Veterinarians will work to fix Keiko's skin disease. They believe it's caused by a virus. In Oregon, they hope that they'll help this little guy gain some weight. Believe it or not, he's underweight at 2.5 tons. They'll feed him plenty of fish, 250 pounds a day. Keiko's trainers spend up to 9 hours a day with him. Carla Corral hopes she'll get chosen to make the trip with Keiko.
He's my best friend, he's my lover, he's part of my family, he's everything.
Keiko will keep up his training in Oregon, but there will be no public displays. The plan is to get him adjusted to a more natural environment. And perhaps find him a girlfriend, or return him to the wild. But for a killer whale, he's awfully friendly. In Mexico City, Lisa Balick, News Center 6.
You have to have remembered every moment of that particular story, right?
I remember pretty much every moment of covering this for more than 2 years because, again, it was the cliche, a whale of a tale, and the intrigue, the politics, negotiations, the care for the whale. Carla, by the way, was one of the people that did come up, and was, helping with the whale. But you can see right there, the human interaction was so tremendous with this whale. So when you think about it, the goal was to perhaps get him to freedom. But clearly it was going to be quite a challenge because he had essentially grown up in the company of humans and the interaction with humans rather than orcas. And
that's a really good point. And I have a little timeline here. I'll recap very briefly. 1977-78, Keiko was born, captured 1979, so about 2 years old, near Iceland, taken to an aquarium. Then 82, transferred to an aquarium, Ontario, Canada. Then 85, sold to Aventura in Mexico City, what we were just watching. Stars in Free Willy in 1993, so that's 8 years later. The outcry happens, and then as you said, this is 1995 where the agreement comes into place. The foundation was formed, and up to Oregon, Keiko is going to be moved. Now, I don't have good video of that particular moment, but I know I've got Lisa Balick, who remembers covering every single moment. So tell us about the move from Mexico to Oregon.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, first of all, there were, I think, several hundred folks from the media, for this that were there at the aquarium. And, it was quite a process, obviously, because, it's not like he's going to, hop onto, a plane. Right. It was a lot of work to try and put this, to put this whole thing together. It was in September of 1998, I'm looking at my notes, that he was flown in a C-17 military Air Force cargo plane. And, they pulled him up in a sling, had a special box built for him that was filled with ice. They kept, pouring the ice in. It was about 4 feet of water in there. And keep in mind with whales, I mean, yes, I became the trivia queen, the Keiko queen of trivia of whales, but of Keiko in particular. But they sleep, but they're essentially always awake because half their brain sleeps while the other half is awake, because whales are conscious breathers. They have to get to the surface to breathe. And also you have the predator issue. So Keiko was awake essentially for the whole trip. And made it just fine, but looking at the, the timeline of when this was happening, it was, I mean, he was trucked to the aquarium in a UPS. It was a UPS, excuse me. I'm sorry. I have my planes wrong. The
C-17
UPS
to Iceland,
the
UPS
C-17
to
was
Oregon.
To Iceland. This one was basically a UPS 130 that brought him from Mexico City to Oregon. And it was just, it was incredible. I mean, there was a huge parade from the small airport, to the aquarium. I mean, it was lined up like it was a New Year's Day parade with people. And then everything was set up, and, it took, quite a while. It was a rainy day, lifting him up in a big sling with a huge, 3-story high crane. In fact, there was a cover of Life magazine showing this at the time. Wow. And then put him into the pool, and he just took right to it, started swimming around. And again, a dramatic difference from where he was. This was so much larger. It had huge underwater windows. And, maybe you have some of the video, but he was as fascinated with the crowds that came there. He wasn't performing anymore, as I mentioned, but he was on display in the sense of not up top where his trainers work with him, but down below there were these huge windows where everyone can just gather at the window, watch him. And his interactions with people, there's no question he was interacting. It wasn't just, oh, I think he looked at me. I mean, he definitely did.
Yeah, grew up interacting with humans. So that was 1996. And then 2 years later, we're going to get to the details of it after we take a break. So before that, though, for those 2 years, 96 to 98, before he gets moved to Iceland, what stories did you do on the rehabilitation, on the bringing back to health?
I was out there pretty much every day, making the drive from Portland to Newport, because, again, this was an incredible story. Every day brought something new. Wow. His trainers worked with him because he was, a couple thousand pounds underweight. Yeah. They had to try and get him to eat live fish. They had to get him exercise because he was essentially this thin, listless whale that really needed to be trained and exercised. And so they had all kinds of, plans to where they had him, try and leap up out of the water, and they ran around, many times with doing laps with him, getting him essentially in shape for what he might need in the open ocean. And they worked with him so well. It was astounding to see, once again, that he worked with the trainers. It was like any kind of animal that, responds to behavioral cues. He got to know their hand signals. They were in the pool at times with him, but, tried to, back off of that over time. Yeah. And, but the work that was being done every day, it wasn't like, oh, here's your walk. No, it was all day long that they were working with him to build up his strength, to build up his stamina, to get rid of that skin disease that you saw in him. That actually went away with that natural seawater over time. So to see him develop from essentially a listless, thin whale into a very strong orca was fascinating. I mean, they put in equipment in the water so they could monitor sounds he made when they weren't there, let's say overnight, and just really do a lot of research as well.
2 years of intense killer whale rehabilitation. And that led to another big flight. You teased it, talking about the C-17. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll bring you to 1998 and that trip to Iceland. And Lisa will continue to join us to bring us this story, Keiko, that she got to see firsthand. We'll be right back. And we are back. Chip Brewster, I can't say my own name, Lisa Balick. I know Lisa's name at least. And this is We Witness. We were talking about a story of Keiko, the killer whale, that many people know better by the name Free Willy, and the years of just, turmoil from the capture to rehabilitation, what we were just talking about, to the ultimate effort, Lisa, setting Keiko free, returning to the wild, which started with a trip to Iceland. So we're going to set everyone up with a package that you did. This is now, let me check my notes, September 1998, and Keiko's flight and arrival into Iceland. So let's step back in time.
The 10,000-pound passenger didn't have much wiggle room. No in-flight meals or movies. And the crew turned the temperature down to 50 degrees.
With the marine mammal, they have a problem with overheating. That's why we added about a ton of ice as well.
And for us, a very likely dream seems to be coming true.
Just 8.5 hours after leaving Oregon, Keiko arrived mid-morning in Iceland. A bit of a jolt when the Air Force C-17 plane broke some landing gear on touchdown.
Keiko isn't the first thing off the plane, because when you're traveling with a whale, well, you have a whale-sized load of luggage. In fact, that first container there contains Keiko's food that he'll eat for the first few days he's here in Iceland.
Children got out of school early to welcome their new neighbor. Keep in mind, only 5,000 people live in the Westman Islands. They couldn't see Keiko inside his custom-made shipping box, but they're glad he's here.
I think it's really great that Keiko's coming because, you know, this is his natural habitat.
After a half-hour ride to the harbor, a huge crane lifted Keiko's box onto a barge. Tugboats pushed Keiko's barge out to his cove, just a few minutes away from the harbor. As I followed on a boat nearby, I realized this was the last time we'll likely ever be this close to Oregon's orca. Keiko remained calm for his final airborne ride, covered in lanolin to keep his skin moist during his trip to Iceland. This was the moment his keepers worked towards since Keiko came to Oregon. Free Willy was as close to freedom as he's ever been in 18 years. Back in his birth waters, he began exploring his new home. Keiko had a heyday exploring. He started eating right away, a sight that even got his gruff veterinarian a little choked up.
He swam into his new surroundings and he ate immediately. And as a veterinarian, as a medical supervisor, and as a human being, it can't get any better.
But Keiko's only just begun his journey to freedom. In Iceland, with photographer Lori Olson, Lisa Balick, KOIN 6 News.
Lisa, it's one thing to report on a story. It's another to experience it. And so before we get into the news side of this, I want to hear from you, the person. What was it like to be there, to see all of this take place, to see the crowds turn out for Keiko?
It was exciting because, you know, we often don't get to see something essentially full circle. And, you know, to have the opportunity to have the support of my station, to be able to go there, to follow the story that I had followed in Oregon for about 2.5 years, pretty much daily. It was wonderful to be there, to be sort of the expert, you know, back for the folks at home, you know, doing reports. You know, just as a side, as a reporter, you know, you have a tremendous time difference, and, you know, found a little place to stay, and I would literally sleep in my clothes, get up at 2 a.m, walk across the island, this little tiny island of Heme, and go to a little gas station in the dark, climb upstairs, and there was a scaffolding built that the network had built, stepped outside the window and went live for a newscast at, you know, 3 o'clock in the morning with the baby behind me, and then, you know, back to bed. So it was a wonderful experience. It was great, like, you know, as you saw the veterinarian, to get him that far, where a lot of naysayers didn't think, you know, anything would happen in terms of even getting him back to Iceland, to the native waters.
And that was one of the early conversations, is all of this effort worth it? And obviously it's going to depend on who you ask there, but the main point of debate is, can you get an orca that has basically spent their entire life in captivity able to survive in the wild?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely was a point of debate and discussion. In other words, once he got there, he was in that netted pen, which was about the size of a football field. It was anchored to the, sea floor. It had an opening, and at first they would open, he would swim out, and then come back, for meals. Still challenged with eating live fish. Mostly it was herring is what he was fed, 200 pounds a day. And they would then take him out. They would have a motorboat, take him out on sort of guided walks, into the ocean. And they introduced him to different whale pods, but, they do a lot of genetic work and were not able to identify his particular pod that he had come from. So things didn't click, so to speak, to find his tribe out there in the wild. And eventually, as I said, the netting was open so he could come and go as he pleased. And what happened eventually was that he went out and was gone and was found, about a month or so. Let me look at my notes, but it was quite a bit later.
Yeah.
He disappeared for 2 months in 2002, and he was discovered off Norway, about 800 miles away. So clearly he had the capacity to swim, the capacity to eat, to get that far. So those were some of the wins, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
But then, he died of pneumonia. He was age-wise 27. Male orcas basically in the wild live anywhere from 30 to 60 years. So when you look at the support that was given to him, the private money that was spent, the research that was done, the tremendous research on orcas, you look at this and you say, well, was it a win? I mean, I think a lot of people would say, yes, it was a win because it really brought out the idea of should animals be held in captivity, and what about releasing them, and what about trying not to have the animals in captivity, promoting a lot of discussion in that area.
Yeah. I want to continue this part of our conversation, but first I'm going to step back one more time to the day after Keiko's arrival, because you did another great story, and I just want to share that with the viewers to let them in a bit more to see what that pen was like in Iceland. So let's go back to September 1998.
Keiko is just as fascinated as always with everything around him. Take a look. This guy has been cruising all night long here. He's like a kid in a candy store. Oregon's orca is exploring every nook and cranny of his new home. He's hardly slept a wink. He's so excited about living in the ocean for the first time in almost 20 years. Take a look at what he sees down below. The netting that makes up his pen allows lots of sea life to swim in and out. Keiko's got a lot more company here than he ever had in Oregon.
Here last night, the amounts of bait fish in this pool were amazing. They were all attracted by the light that we had out here, so they were up near the surface, and Keiko was looking at them.
The water temperature is about 50 degrees, the same as in Newport, and it seems Keiko is loving the climate.
This seems to be ideal weather for Keiko. You have to keep in mind always that this is the area, Iceland, where Keiko is from.
He's transitioned so far in the first 24 hours quite well, much better than I had ever expected him to do.
Really? You're surprised?
And we're very surprised. I mean, that was a long flight. 11 hours is a long flight. And animals traditionally are a little stiff and a little slow.
His new home is still getting some adjustments. That means more to explore for curious Keiko.
Blow, down, go.
They're already starting research here using hydrophones underneath the water. They record Keiko's sounds, and then his researchers connect those sounds with Keiko's movements.
I'd like to, predict that I'd have this bay pen open and allow him to be swimming in the bay by next spring. That'd be a wonderful thing to do, but I'm going to leave it up to him, and he seems to be doing very well so far, and after day one, and we'll just continue to keep our fingers crossed and work hard at what we're doing.
Keiko's great adventure is far from over.
2.5 years ago, this was a pipe dream.
In Iceland, with photographer Lori Olson and Keiko, Lisa Balick, KOIN 6 News.
And so there it is, that first full day, a little bit closer look at the enclosure, if you want to call it that, with netting. Lisa, you had mentioned that they would go on these kind of walks around the bay or swims around the bay with Keiko. I have in my notes, it was July 15th, 2002. That's when he was fully freed and began that trip to Norway. So it was about a month later, departed from Iceland, made to Norway. And then along the way, though, there were some issues that popped up. Wasn't fully engaged in the wild, would seek out human contact, even letting kids ride him out in the waters, and would go near groups of wild orcas, but remain 100 to 300 meters away. So never really fully reintegrated into the wild orca environment. And you listed great the wins and the potential losses, or at least what some people might call it that. Overall, though, what a fascinating story, just to have someone try to do this.
Yeah, and I think that's really what it was all about. As I said in the beginning in our conversation, that from the beginning you could see he was so attached to humans at that point, and he wasn't a 2-year-old anymore.
Yeah.
And he pretty much was a mature adult by the time he ended up back in Iceland. So to sort of all of a sudden change behaviors, if you think, as a human, how difficult it is to change behavior or your environment, you're a lot more malleable when you're a kid. As you get older, not so adventurous maybe. So I think there was never a promise that he was going to, go swim, and be Free Willy out with, the rest of the orcas.
Yeah.
But I think it surprised so many people that he got as far as he did. And keep in mind, there was a tremendous amount of research that was going on as well into orcas, which are obviously, a fascinating species. I mean, they're not an endangered species, but it's a species that still, there's a lot of work that's being done to study them, to help with their survival, because there has been, some problems. So I think from a research component, from a public awareness component, like you said, you were, a child back then, with the movie,
Yeah.
and you then know that, and, talk to your kids about the movie and when they watch it and what actually happened, just the awareness of the animals that we are still putting in captivity, and for what purposes, and to maybe rethink a lot of that at this point as to, risk benefit gain. And again, Keiko essentially is the poster child for helping animals, to go back into the wild or not be, put in captivity in the first place.
Well, Keiko Queen, Lisa Balick, thank you for taking the time to revisit this story and introduce a whole another generation to Keiko's story and the list of everything that had happened right along with it. We really appreciate you joining us on We Witnessed.
Thanks, Chip. It was so fun to go back and enjoy it once again, from having lived it, and then to go back and still remember how wonderful it was to be part of that whole adventure.
Absolutely. And I hope to see everyone else on another episode of We Witnessed. Take care.